Hey there everyone, and welcome to another video. I'm Cassandra from CassandraTyndall.com, and today we're going to be having a reflection of Jupiter in Pisces. So earlier this week on my Instagram account, I did a little poll. I created one of those polls in the stories, and I asked if people are looking forward to Jupiter returning back to Aquarius. So Jupiter has been in Pisces from about May 13, 14 here in Australia through until July 28. So just overnight, my time, Jupiter moved back into Aquarius. So it was a mid-year break that many people were really anticipating. But during the period of time between May and the end of July, a lot of people felt perhaps a little bit maybe disappointed, or potentially, why wasn't this transit all that was cracked up to be? So I thought we'd spend a little bit of time today reflecting on that and how we can use these reflections to really sort of catapult us or help to re-inspire us moving forward, at least until the rest of 2021. So we will be in August by this weekend, and on the downhill slope of 2021, there's still a ways to go yet, but we will be returning to Jupiter in Pisces. And to be fair, Jupiter in Pisces does not really start until 2021, where we'll have from the very end of December through until about May 11, where we'll have Jupiter move through the entire 30-degree span. So we'll have a very intensified Jupiter in Pisces transit. So that is something to look forward to. And one of the key differences with this particular transit is that Jupiter only moved 2 degrees. So it just took Jupiter just put its toe into those Piscean waters. So not only was this transit sort of bitterly brief, it only moved in 2 degrees. So while Jupiter did activate a whole sign house in each of our birth charts somewhere, that being said, very few of us would have a point, ascendant or midheaven, or a planet around 2 degrees of a water sign to form that trine, or even 2 degrees of a mutable sign to form those squares. So as an example, I do have my sun at 4 Cancer, so I didn't even quite get that tight connection there. So even though Jupiter did make the whole sign activation, for most of us, a good majority of us, we didn't get that tight conjunction. Now, in my Jupiter in Pisces video that I recorded earlier this year, which I can link for you, I did go into a little bit more about who is Jupiter and who is Jupiter when it's in Pisces. So I'll just touch on that very briefly. Jupiter in Pisces was so anticipated because Jupiter, that planet of support, of growth, of cohesion and things expanding, Jupiter is a planet that, whatever it touches in our birth chart, we can expect some type of benefit or benevolence. We can expect some kind of growth, or generally topics being amplified or made bigger in some way. Doesn't always mean that those topics will be made bigger in a great way, but generally it will. Jupiter is a helpful planet above all things, so it does really want to bring its best forward. And when it's in its own sign, which Pisces is one, Sagittarius is the other, it does really want to bring forward its best quality. So it has an expansive and a broadening and an amplifying energy to it. When it's in Pisces, however, it is a different version of that expansion and amplification, because Pisces as a sign is a nocturnal sign. It's introspective, it's sort of muted, it's subterranean, it's water. So it's more about emotions, it's more about connectivity, it's more about that intuition and that introspection. So Jupiter was amplifying those more internal components of our life. So do go back to that video and check out more about that. So the last 10 weeks or so, has brought a lot of sweet relief. The last time we had Jupiter in a favorable place was in 2019, where Jupiter took its full tour for the full year in Sagittarius. So it was fiery, it was dynamic, it was let's do all the things and say yes to all the things. And since then, since Jupiter moved into Capricorn, December 2019, life kind of went downhill for many of us in many respects. Well, the world collectively, the energy very much changed. And then by the solstice of December 2020, Jupiter then moved into Aquarius alongside Saturn. So we sort of had Jupiter and Saturn together in Capricorn, Jupiter, Saturn together in Aquarius, with that last 10 weeks as a little bit of a soothing balm, a little bit of a buffer or a cushioning to that huge Saturnian, restrictive, authoritative, limiting energy that we've all collectively been in to various extents and degrees. So there's no question, that was something to really be looking forward to. Just a little bit of sweet relief, maybe just a little bit of like a nourishment, a bit of soothing, a sip of water on a very dry, hot day. So there was a little bit of grace, a little bit of compassion, and a little bit of comfort experienced. And I think for the majority of that was really felt in the Northern Hemisphere, because obviously that is your spring and your summer, and that was when life was reopening, things were feeling a little bit more like normal. You could travel a bit, you could connect with friends and family. So there was this sense of a cosmic buffer or a cosmic ointment that just made, at least for a little while, things feel a little bit better. Now, one thing I think many of us may have not quite allowed room for with the Jupiter and Pisces transit was maybe that flood or that inundation of grief. That having so much water come through, because if you think Jupiter in Pisces happened also throughout Cancer season, we'll cover that in a minute, but with so much water coming to the party after so much coldness and so much dryness. And there was a sense of grief or overwhelm or emotion being able to be released. So in some respects, Jupiter in Pisces was almost a little bit of a sigh of relief, a little bit of a break, a little bit of a breather, but also a little bit bittersweet too. So we might have got to hug those loved ones for the first time, or go out and enjoy a meal with our friends. And also just a time to be still and emotionally or reflect on the experiences of recent months. So one of the reasons I think this transit wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, it was really anticipated. And even though Jupiter can be a problem solver, it didn't have much of an opportunity to do so. Jupiter entered Pisces when it was starting to get in range of retrograde motion. So within that 6 weeks of being in Pisces, it went retrograde pretty quickly. So then that compounds that reflection or revising, that review or that redoing. So it might be, hey, can you actually hang out with your friends? Or hey, can you actually go and travel to that place? And so we sort of seen that collectively with sort of changes in recommendations with masks, no masks, and the rules kind of shifting and changing. But when we sort of just stick to the astrology and the feeling that we went into, even though Jupiter in Pisces in of itself is very helpful, it was touring Pisces when the South Node, the lunar South Node, was also in Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius. And not only was the South Node in Jupiter's sign, the South Node has that depletion, or it has that pouring out or that emptying out, a feeling of leakage or drainage. The South Node is an energy that it's a taking energy or an elimination type of energy. When you go to the archetype of the head or tail of the dragon The North Node is about bringing things in and taking things in. And then the South Node is that purification and elimination. So those Jupiter archetypes of travel, expansion, teaching, learning, experiential, traveling, going to university, finishing the PhD, or going to far-flung corners of the earth, just hasn't been available to us while the South Node has been in Sagittarius. So Jupiter coming into Pisces may have sort of amplified the grief of what was lost. It may have amplified the maybe some more internal perspective shifting and what is really important to us in that way. Maybe grieve. I know myself personally, I've really grieved not being able to travel. I usually, spend maybe like a month overseas each year working and touring where I can. So we had the South Node in Sagittarius plus eclipses. So we had the lunar eclipse on May 26 at early degrees of Sagittarius, so making a direct square to Jupiter and Pisces. We had the new moon in Gemini in around June 10, plus a Mercury retrograde that happened towards the end of June. So when Jupiter moved into Pisces, it also, I think one thing that got overlooked with the excitement of that ingress, it also allowed Saturn to be able to be free and to get up to its own devices. So that coldness, that harshness, that severity of Saturn may have become more obvious for some of us. So if Aquarius is a dominant position in your birth chart, if you've got planets in Aquarius, or if you are in a Saturn perfection year ruled by Aquarius, you may have felt that sense of whiplash or jolting that you didn't, it was sort of almost this, oh shite, now I know what Saturn feels like without that support or buffering or padding from Jupiter. So when Jupiter was also in Aquarius, we had so Jupiter in Pisces, we had Cancer season, and that started with Mars. So Mars was already sort of almost midway through Cancer when Jupiter first ingressed into Pisces. So Mars was in Cancer from about April 24 to June 12. That being said, yes, planets in Cancer do have the capacity to exalt Jupiter, because Jupiter finds its place of exaltation in the sign of Cancer. So technically speaking, there is that sense of reception. Mars welcomed Jupiter into its home and exalted it. But still, there's this dynamic here. And this was something I was sort of grappling with, even with the transit itself, thinking, okay, well, there's this technical component of Jupiter in Pisces, Mars in Cancer, but it still was being bona fide by a malefic. So that, I don't know, it's a bit of an even Stevens or a little bit of a neutral type of bonification. So reception from a malefic in poor condition was only capable, I think, of helping Jupiter to a certain extent, and not as much as most of us, I'm sure, would have hoped for. So by the time we rolled around to sort of June 3 through to 28, there was a bit of a landscape change, and that was through Venus moving into Cancer. And of course, that is a much friendlier energy. And then I think by about June 3, we had that trine between the two benefics. So Venus in Cancer and Jupiter in Pisces. So one other thing that I think may have made this transit a little bit not all that we sort of hoped that it would be, is that when Jupiter was occupying Pisces, it left Saturn to deal with those squares from Uranus, the transit from Mars in Leo, which was quite explosive. And it had, again, that sense of no buffering or no support. So it did really amplify the energy or the clashes or the tension that those who have fixed signs dominant in their chart, or planets occupying fixed signs, may have felt a lot more difficult for those people in particular. So that sort of may have overshadowed a big portion of at least that sort of second part of the Jupiter and Pisces cycle. So Jupiter was then in retrograde in Pisces, Mars moving into Leo and setting off that Uranus-Saturn paradigm as well. So that being said, I think those were some of the conditions that we were dealing with. Well, they were some of the conditions that we were dealing with Jupiter and Pisces. So although Jupiter and Pisces was well equipped to bring support, to bring some nourishment, to bring connection or emotion, some watery goodness back to the landscape, it was doing so in pretty parched, volatile circumstances. So it was almost like when your plant is super, super dry, but you've only got a small amount of water to give it. I often do that with my house plants. I've only got a little bit of water left in that glass. Rather than throw it down the sink, I'll sort of throw it into a plant. And I know that it needs more, but it was just a little bit of something. So another way to look at that is if you've ever been to a really beautiful degustation restaurant and you just get all these different things on the plate that come out to you, and there's always be one thing that you really enjoy as a part of that, and you just get a bite of it and you're like, oh, I'd love more of that. But then before you know it, the next meal is out, or the next sort of bite-sized snack. So if there was something that you really enjoyed out of these last 10 weeks of Jupiter and Pisces, maybe you had an increased awareness of what feels right in the waters within you. Maybe you recalibrated some of your old beliefs, especially with the South Node and eclipses in the Gemini Sagittarius axis. So maybe what was important to you 1 year, 2 years ago doesn't feel quite as important to you now. Maybe you've got some renewed compassion, maybe some renewed empathy. Maybe you've had more intuitive insights, those things that don't always make logical or practical sense, but feel right for you. Maybe you've made some moves in your life that just simply feel right. Maybe you also figured out what no longer works for you. And that's a little bit of that soothing balm of Pisces, when you can look at things from a different perspective. Jupiter is very much a perspective generating type of planet. And when it's in its own sign, it can really help us tap into those perspectives within a lot more and sort of shut out some of the noise that's out there. Jupiter and Pisces over the last 10 weeks may have given you some inklings or insights of hope for the future that will come through in very late December through to May next year. What seeds may have been planted over these last 10 weeks? What intuitive knowings or inklings or new awarenesses that you have that you can use that intel and sort of project that forward? What can you build? What can you dream for the future? So there's some of my reflections of Jupiter in Pisces. I hope that's maybe helped you figure out or make some sense of what the last 10 weeks have been, and also what those last 10 weeks may have not have been, and also see them as opportunities to reflect and dream. And the next sort of 5-ish months of 2021 can help you from that renewed, inspired place. In Jupiter coming back to Saturn's sign can help you maybe approach some challenges in your life with some new maturity, maybe from a more self-aware, objective place. Maybe some of the responsibilities you have had or obligations that you've had in your life, you can just go, they don't feel right for me anymore, and I don't need to explain or justify. I just know within myself now, this is something I can no longer do. For some of us, maybe we're aware that we need to double down on some of our responsibilities or some of the work that we have to do in our lives. Looking to your own birth chart will help give you some inspired guidance around that, particularly the Aquarius part of your life. Jupiter moving back into Aquarius can give you perhaps a bit more of a buoyant or optimistic or hopeful outlook on the work that needs to be done. Now, Jupiter is going to go back into Aquarius for the rest of this year, and it's going to travel from 29 to 22 degrees of Aquarius, which is the landscape it covered from around March 26 through till when Jupiter entered Pisces in mid-May, May 13, 14. So if you can cast your mind to some of the events from late March, April, and mid-May, that may give you some inspired insight into what you need to double down on to sort of help you kind of make some positive inroads for the rest of the year to set you up for success moving forward into 2022. So it may help buffer some of the harshness of Saturn. So Saturn is basically getting his happy house guests back. And one thing I often try and teach my son, who's 7, about having to do jobs and chores and stuff around the house. If you can do it with the right attitude, it's so much better to do it. And so, yeah, there's probably going to be some challenge and some difficulty as a part of the rest of 2021. They're not going to go anywhere, but having a bit more of an inspired outlook that comes from a place from within rather than just blind faith can be quite reassuring that you're kind of going on the track that works best for you. So you might even be able to see some of those positive limitations or aspects around adversity or limitations or changes that are occurring in your life. But I think what the transition of Jupiter from Aquarius into Pisces and back into Aquarius can really help us double down on quality rather than quantity. And the last 10 weeks have probably taught many of us from different, various standpoints, is the value of that introspection, that we do need to value our own intuition, our own awareness, despite all the noise that's going on in the world. So taking an inspired new vision, make that solid and let that be your foundation from which to continue the work, and that hopefully from very late December through until May will set you a really great foundation for that period. So I do hope that this has given you some new perspectives on what we've just been through and what we're going to enter into. And even if Jupiter in Pisces was an amazing transit for you and you might be feeling a little bit gloomy about it not being there anymore, it will come back. The planets and the sky are always moving. So don't beat yourself up too much if you are feeling a little bit sad about Jupiter being back in Aquarius. For me, I'm loving it. I can't wait for Jupiter to sort of really get some motion happening once it moves direct. I think that's in, let me check, where's my ephemeris? I think that happens in maybe as soon as August, actually. Oh no, a bit further on, October. So we've got a little ways to go with the retrograde cycle. So if you would like some more personal guidance or a little bit more insight around the astrology, not of only just of the moment, but of the next 12 months or so, I still do have my sale, my July sale, and that will finish up this weekend. And if you go over to my website, cassandratyndall.com, I'll pop a link in the description below. If you use the code July20, you'll get yourself a 20% discount on a consultation that you can take at a time that suits you. So I hope that's helped you. I hope that's helped to perhaps give you some new perspectives and insight and how you can make the most of Jupiter in Aquarius.